Malison, The Cursed City is a fantasy survival horror RPG published by Devolver Digital, currently in development, in which you investigate a sinister city filled with hundreds of grotesque monsters, demons, and weirdos. It focuses on exploration and atmosphere. Its main influences are both classic Western RPGs like Baldur's Gate, Japanese RPGs like Final Fantasy, as well as survival horror games such as the Resident Evil and Silent Hill series. As you sneak through the city, you encounter all sorts of strange characters, many of which you can speak to, trade with, recruit to your cause, steal from, or even attack if you so choose. You can approach this game in a million ways. It's up to you how you plan to survive. Your actions may lead to wealth, disaster, betrayal, or may even lead to uncovering some of the city's darkest secrets and the game's many hidden endings. The main character is no powerful hero. You awaken in the city transformed into a weak, frail goblin, and may need to rely on desperate measures for your survival. You will likely need help from other survivors you meet, and it is up to you to decide who you trust and recruit to your cause. Combat is in a classic turn-based style with a focus on managing scarce resources and building unique strategies by recruiting all sorts of different party members, equipping them, and teaching them new skills. Monsters move closer to you during combat, increasing the threat and tension as they begin using their more devastating attacks. You do not want them too close. I stream development work of Malison Tuesday to Friday at 7 p.m. EST on Twitch. I also have new development update streams on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. EST. There is also a Discord you can join for the game. Check below. There you go. So that's my pitch. I mean, it's a pitch, and then there's a little thing at the end that's more like an ad. There you go. I'm not alone on the development side. Many people do freelance work with environment art, character designs, writing, editing, music, composing, as well as several guest-written encounters and events that you can find hidden throughout the game. Alright. So, now let's do the actual status updates. Now, since this is the first of these status updates, I'll try to be more general at the start and get more specific as I go on. This should make it easy to avoid spoilers, depending on how sensitive you are to those. I'll warn you before I start going into more detail. So, let's start with the general situation with the game. First, the general systems. The game's core general systems are working. dialogues, event scripting, inventory, equipment, item and monster databases, saving the game, quest tracking, combat, learning skills, picking locks, picking pockets, finding hidden objects and secret passages, interacting with special objects, creature pathfinding, friendly NPCs joining battles, enemy AI, dynamic enemy AI, identifying items, all of that. But there's a lot of missing content right now that ties with these systems, right? So for instance, the whole system for like casting magic spells is there, but there's a bunch of like missing spells, right? So that's how I'm trying to like separate here like a system versus like the content of that system. So the magic system, you could argue, isn't really done, right? Like all of the structure around it and the systems around it works, but there's actually a lot of spells themselves that still need to be like designed and actually scripted and implemented. So there are, however, two main missing or incomplete systems in the game right now. So one is the animation scripting system. This is for programming magic spell animations and stuff. So like right now when you cast spell animations, it just plays like a little hand animated sprite to show like what's happening. But I want to make like a system where I can do like, okay, there's going to be a flash here, there's going to be a texture over the screen. I want to build something to make it easier for me to actually program those spell animations later, because otherwise it would be way too much work to do all of them. Yeah, screen shake, all these little, just something to basically, I want to have like a cool menu where I can just like schedule like all the different effects, like, okay, a flash on frame 1, a screen shake on frame 3, the sound effect plays at this bit of the frame, you know, that kind of thing. I want to make a little menu with windows and stuff where I can like set this up internally with the game, right? So that's not there yet, and I've been waiting on this because the battle animations have not been like a big priority. So as long as I'm not actually working on these, I don't think of working on the system to make them. So there you go. Also, there's also something about the hit location logic for critical hits. So that's the other sort of main core missing system right now. So in the game, when you do a critical hit, or also when you use certain attacks, there are status effects that affect a target's limbs, right? So like, for instance, there might be like a low attack that's supposed to like damage a creature's legs, or you can attack a monster's like weapon holding arm and stuff like that. And critical hits do that. At least that's the plan. And right now that's not fully working yet. There's just some preliminary, that's been like in the preliminary phase for a long time. Right now the only stuff like this right now is the more sort of basic status effects like blinding and stunning on certain weapons. But it needs to have something that maps like certain attacks to that status effect. So like a creature that can breathe fire shouldn't be able to breathe fire if you damaged its head, basically. That sort of thing. Let's see. So yeah, that's the main like missing like incomplete core system right now. Now the next part is the core path. So the game's core path, that was finishing the core path of the game, has been sort of the focus of the work up until recently. So a game's core path is basically, if you start at the prologue of the game and you just make the simplest path possible from here to the final boss, where are you going, right? So all the basic stuff, dismissing like side quests and stuff unless the side quests are required somehow. So just the simplest path from the start to the end of the game, the golden path or core path, right? And this was the focus of development on the game up until recently. Right now, the game's path, the golden path, is working and has been tested. There's still some little missing things, but some stuff needs polish and rebalancing. Like the final boss itself needs a lot more work right now. It's very basic. But that's something that's essentially done. And okay, the next point for like general stuff about the game progress, balancing. The game's balance will need a lot of work. This is a game with a strong resource management aspect, and so having the resources well balanced, so that you don't end up with no items at all, or that you don't end up with so many items that you don't really need to think about what you're using at all, right? Like striking this balance is going to be one of the bigger challenges here. Now, I can only work on balancing sections of the game when the side content is done for that section. So that's been something that's kind of prevented me a bit from working on balancing. So right now, really the main place that I can balance is Chapter 1, because that's the part of the game that has the most of its quests complete. So Chapter 1 right now is actually pretty well balanced. It's actually... I made it maybe a bit too hard. I'll probably balance it down a little. And the rest of the game right now is way too easy. There's too many resources. As soon as you reach Chapter 2, and you start exploring a bit, you end up having so many items that you don't even know what to do with them. It's cluttering your inventory. So, you know, that's what the game is like before a balancing sort of balancing work. But Chapter 1, I'm pretty happy with the balancing so far. So I'll just need to sort of do what I did with Chapter 1 and the rest of the game, and we should be good. So yeah, that was like the general situation. Now, let's go into the content. Let's go into like the general content that's missing right now. So, like I said earlier, the game's secondary systems are mostly done, but sometimes the content that those things use is incomplete, right? So, okay, for instance, items. The game has thousands of items. Potions, skill books, keys, weapons, armors, accessories, tools, rare artifacts, treasures. Most of these are complete and have their sprite assets, but many of the more special, unique items either need work or are missing. One of those is the game's artifacts. The game's artifacts... Those are a big set of special items that are found in different places every time you play the game. They're like scrambled, and their locations are scrambled with one another at the start of the game. There's actually quite a few missing. Maybe about half of them are. The wizard spells are about halfway done. So one of the spell schools has almost all of its spells, except only like some of its higher tier spells. 2 of the spell schools are about halfway done, and 1 spell school has very few spells in it. Attack animations, I mentioned those earlier. Attack animations, other than melee attacks, so you see in the video, there's like when you use a weapon, there's like a swing, and you see like the weapons, and that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with those. They still need a little more like crunch, a little more like impact, maybe a bit more like a hit stop on the hit. Little flashes, needs a little more, but I think those are really close, like this, right? But the spell animations or the effects from using items, those have a lot missing. This is actually one of the parts of the game that I put the least amount of work in so far. So that's going to need to be something I put more emphasis on in the future. And like I said earlier, part of this is that I didn't set up the system to strip the spell effects yet. And I'm kind of waiting on that before I really go into this. Next, for content, classes. So the main character classes, so warrior, rogue, wizard, and bard. There's also kind of other like secondary classes tied to the different factions and gods and demons. Like you can be basically like you can worship some of the like gods and demons of the setting, and those also kind of are like classes. So the main classes are working, but the prestige classes, which are classes you can only get from like you need to like meet a bunch of requirements to obtain those, and those are kind of like sort of higher tier classes, right? Like for instance, The warrior is a base class, and anyone, as long as you have the skill points for it, you can just become a warrior, even if you're a weakling, right? Even if you're really weak, no matter what, every character in the game basically can become a warrior. But in order to become a berserker, you need to be a warrior, and you need to have specific skills of warrior, and you need to find a specific character in the game that's going to teach you, that's going to like make you into a berserker, right? So those are a lot more difficult to get than the basic classes. They take more exploration. You need to know about them. So they're almost like big like rewards for exploring. So yeah, but those are not working yet at all. Though the prestige classes are not in the game like whatsoever. The closest thing to prestige classes in the game right now are the specialist mages. Those are working, like the mechanics that those classes would be using are working, but no one in the game yet actually makes you a specialist mage. So I need to actually find all the different, like, I'll need to add a bunch of wizards in the game that can make you an enchanter or a necromancer, etc. So those specialist mages, yeah. So they work mechanically, like I can cheat and make myself a necromancer, and some of the features of the necromancer actually work. But you can't actually normally get them yet. While the other prestige classes, they don't, there's nothing. They're like kind of designed, but you know, so that's something I still need to work on. Now, visual assets. As you can probably tell if you look at the little demo that's been looping closely, you'll probably find that there's a lot of placeholder assets here, like here. See, right here. So the buildings here look really nice. This is by Scaradactyl. I don't know if he's in chat. So these buildings look really nice. The tiles look kind of finished. But some of the characters, though, like, look at this guy. What's up with this guy? What isn't that even? You know? So some of these are, like, basically placeholders. I just took the character sprite, like, when you're talking to him, and I just, like, shrunk him to be the size of a character, just so that there's something to show on screen. So I'll need to actually, like, go through them and actually draw their characters. So the game has a lot of placeholder sprites like this. Sometimes it's more obvious. Some rooms look pretty okay. Like, see, like this here looks good. Like this screen right now, there's no placeholders in this screen, in this fight there. I can't think of I can't see a placeholder. The intro has a bunch. This is from the intro cutscene. That has a bunch of placeholder assets. So you know, it's at various states of completion. It's a mix of like finished sprites, unpolished pixel art, sketches, and like straight up placeholder assets. Some of the monsters have missing poses or just unpolished art and all that. Oh yeah, so the game's locations. So some of the game's locations are clearly unfinished and we'll need to focus on in the future. There's some sketchy looking locations that still need some atmosphere work, especially some sound design work. Music, there is no glaringly missing music tracks right now, so music is at a pretty good place in the game. Most of the music tracks left to make are associated with content that's not yet in the game. So there's actually, like, music tends to be a bit ahead of everything else in the project. Sound effects are a bit of a mixed bag. I've been handling all of it so far, and I'm happy with a lot of it, but some of it I'll probably need help in the future for. I'm pretty happy with the item sounds. Like when you pick up different items, they all sound different, and I'm pretty happy with that. I think they look good. They sound good. And I had a lot of fun with like recording Foley effects and like tossing coins in bowls and crushing celery and stuff. That was fun. And also I've gotten a lot of free sounds from Freesound, the site. And those have been really good, especially for mixing together like atmosphere tracks. One thing that's lacking is the monster sounds. A lot of the monsters in the game right now recycle the same noises, and most of them are just my what Sumner said here. Most of them are just my distorted voice, snorting or growling into a mic. Very entertaining to watch those streams, by the way. Also, a lot of atmospheric, creepy sounds are missing. I need to do like an audio pass on some areas at some point to make them just a bit more, just give them a bit more atmosphere, make them a bit more satisfying. I need to make more room tones. Room tones right now. I don't really have many of those, and room tone is really important if you want to make a place sound quiet. And you want to sort of bring attention that it's a quiet location and that it's like, and you just want this atmosphere, this oppressive atmosphere, you really want room tone for it. Room tone is just a really subtle hum, right? Really subtle. A lot of games do it and you barely notice it, but it makes you like feel the space of the room in your head. It's great. Room tone is super good. But yeah, so that was the general state. Now, I have prepared a little write-up for the state of the game's chapters individually. So now there are some light spoilers incoming. No details, but I'm going to be giving some general information about the game's story setup and the structure of the world, the structure of the game. So I'm not going to go into any specifics, but you know, if you want to really know spoilers, that's your time to duck out of it. So this is a game about I'll just give you like the general gist of the story, just like the setup at the start of the game, basically the introduction. So this is a game about a group of scouts and rescuers investigating what happened to a huge city that was pushed into the sky as a pillar-like mountain grew under it. And you play the role of the weakest, least important member of that team, who is separated from the group and knocked out, to wake up inside the city in a stranger's house and in an unfamiliar body, transformed into a little green goblin man. The game has 5 large sections. Each are tied to a sector of the city. So the prologue is the approach and entrance into the city with your group of rescuers, leading to being separated. Chapter 1 is the proper beginning of the game in the lower city with the slums and the artisans' quarters. Chapter 2 is the middle city where the residential and upper artisans' quarters are found, and you can find the docks too. Chapter 3 is the upper city where the nobles live, and there's a great cathedral, a university, and a colosseum. And Chapter 4 is the palace, where all of the game's paths converge, and where you'll find the game's main endings and final boss and all that. So that's like now there is kind of a Chapter 5 as well, but Chapter 5 isn't really like tied to a different place. Chapter 5 is more like, if you do certain things, if you finish Chapter 4 in a certain way, you get to sort of keep playing, and when you keep playing, there's, more stuff going on. And you're kind of revisiting the rest of the city, and this is how you can access some of the secret endings and, stuff. So it's like, you might describe it as like post-game, right? The post-game, I think, or I guess the end game, that would be Chapter 5. So it's not exactly a chapter, it's not a full chapter. It's more just extra stuff appended to the game in general for you to revisit. Now I'm gonna go over these one by one and just give a short little description of how goes the progress on these. So I should restart this. I really need to figure out how to make this loop. So the prologue is nearly complete. So that's the part where you're approaching the city with your group of rescuers, and it is from the very beginning when you're climbing the cliff to when you reach the front gates, and then you're separated from the group, and that is nearly complete. It needs a little polish. So this is the cutscene here, the start of the cutscene where you're separated from the group. So it needs a little polish and atmosphere, and the end segment of it, as you approach the city's drawbridge, is mostly using sketches and even placeholder assets, so that still takes a lot of work. And the intro credits sequence is also using like all sketches, and there's a lot of missing animations there. But otherwise, though, other than the end of it, the prologue is actually like it's presentable. It's working. Chapter 1, the lower city, is the most complete of the chapters, the main chapters, as far as like quests and side content wise. It has a lot of side quests, a lot of stuff, a lot of NPCs to interact with, a lot of content. This here is, by the way, what I'm currently working on. So right now I'm working on the side content, finishing the side content of Chapter 1. So I'm going to go more into this towards the end of the update. Now, the current state. So some of those quests are unfinished and have missing writing, and there's a few quests and quest branches that are missing. So there's a few quests where like there might be a few different ways it can end, but one of the ways it can end, if you go for that, it just stops, right? There's just nothing. So yeah, I need to finish up all the quests there, and this is what I'm working on. Now, Chapter 2, the middle city. This is the least complete side content-wise. This is the chapter where the game really opens up to the most, like, there's a lot of exploration in Chapter 2. That's where it really blows up. And so there's a large amount of side content to write, and it is missing almost all of it. Or maybe not almost all of it, but a large chunk of it. There's an entire faction full of quests that is basically all missing, right? Like, it's a location, you can visit it, but, like, it's not... There's almost nothing to do there. You can just, like, kill everyone there. You can take all their stuff, but they have nothing to say, basically. So, yeah, Chapter 2 is a big chunk. A big chunk of work left. And that's what I should be starting on Chapter 2 in December. Like, starting on doing the side content of Chapter 2 this December. Chapter 3 is a strange one. Chapter 3 is divided in 3 segments, depending on where your exploration of Chapter 2 has led, right? So there's a bunch of different places, a bunch of different ways to end Chapter 2, and depending on which you went to, you start Chapter 3 in a completely different segment of the game. And you can actually move between those segments, but it takes work. So you're generally stuck in the place where you decided to go through, right? So there is... to the west is the cathedral and the cemetery. In the center is the Great Bridge and the Colosseum. And to the east is the Arcane University and the Palace's Gardens. Now, I have been working on the west segment, so the cathedral and the graveyard. And actually, the cathedral and graveyard is actually one of the closest chapters to just being fully complete. It doesn't have nearly as much quests as all the others. It's a bit more straightforward. Like, the first 2/3 of Chapter 3 is like, you know, it's kind of a straightforward dungeon. It's more like, it's a very hostile area. And generally, the hostile areas are the easiest to make because there's just not that many interactions with all sorts of NPCs and stuff. There's still some stuff to do there. There's secrets, and there's a few NPCs hidden that you can talk to and recruit and stuff. But it is, compared to the rest of the game, it's a fairly straightforward one. Because of this, Chapter 3 is probably the one that I'll have the least... that I'll spend the least amount of time finishing on, like, side content stuff. Because, yeah, we're just focusing on one chunk of it so far. And then after that, there is the Colosseum in the middle. The Colosseum in the middle is not a focus yet, but it is a, like... It's a very basic, like... It's basically like a fighting, like a tournament. It's the tournament arc of the game. It is just like combat focused. It is literally like, you know, it's the stereotypical like fighting arena in an RPG. So that one's probably not going to be too bad. The university and palace gardens, this is one of the things I'll leave for much later in the game, because I want to focus on getting like some really serious chunks of content done. And the gardens and university is going to be a lot of work, so I'm probably going to push this to like way later. So we're not worrying too much about that part of Chapter 3 yet. Then Chapter 4, that's the palace. So this one begins in a different place depending on which path you took through Chapter 3. And so right now most of the focus is on the version of the palace that's from the cathedral area. And much of the palace is done, but the second half has a lot of side quests that need work. So that's the general gist of it. So the Chapter 5, where like it's kind of the post-game state. This one actually has almost no work on it at all, because yeah, that's like so late in the game, and I can only really work on that when most of the game has its content, because a lot of it ties into the other side quests and stuff. So the Chapter 5 is very much like in the preliminary stage. All right, now let's go into the current work. So what I'm actually working on this month. Now I'm working, like I said earlier, on the side quests and secondary content of the game. It's a very large part of the experience, because a lot of the game's appeal is in exploring the city and encountering weird things and using the tools you found so far to deal with those weird things and obtain new tools. Right now I'm working on finishing the side content for Chapter 1, like I said. So for the rest of this month and November, I'll be working on that. At the end of November, we will run some professional playtests of Chapter 1 to find as many of its problems as possible. And after November, I'll be spending 3 months, so from December, and possibly 4 months, because the 3 months include December, and December, tends to be a bit more chill. So maybe I'll need 4 months instead. But yes, after that, it's going to be focusing on the Chapter 2 side content, which, like I said, is possibly the largest chunk of side content missing. And then that will be going to through to either February or March. And then we keep going and finish content for Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Yeah. So that's basically it. Now I guess I can go a little bit more. So that was like the general gist of the progress on the game at large. Now I'm going to go into the Chapter 1, a bit more specifics on Chapter 1. So Chapter 1, it's the smallest and most focused of the game's chapters. So the first half of Chapter 1 is a very straightforward path, and it only opens up into secrets if you're especially curious. And that makes the first half of Chapter 1, fairly straightforward. There's few NPCs to encounter. You can see here, this clip here shows a segment of Chapter 1. This is King Street. So King Street is the second half of Chapter 1. So in Chapter 1, you're making your way through the lower city's artisan quarter. And to reach the big central street that runs through the city, which is King Street, the one you see there. And so you can meet a few characters along the way, but the vast majority of people you meet are in King Street. And once you make it to King Street, you find the path forward deeper into city is blocked, forcing you to interact with the many NPCs nearby, merchants, guards, and stuff. And so this is sort of your introduction, kind of forcing you to interact with NPCs and not just explore. And so this is where most of the side content is. Lots of little quests and people to speak to. Yeah, that's what I'm working on. Because Seaboard is helping me with the writing in the game. He's kind of been doing editing work, kind of going over a lot of the text and rewriting things. Because I write most of the dialogue in the game, but although I think I'm getting a lot better at writing dialogue and writing, like, in general, but I still really struggle giving characters personality, giving characters distinct personality. A lot of the characters I write tend to sound kind of similar. They tend to have kind of a similar vibe to them, and he's been helping a lot in giving them just a bit more individuality. So now I'm actually playing instead of just looping that video. So I'm gonna warp into King Street here. So yeah, this here is sort of the core of King Street, and so one of the issues that a game has had, there's been some playtesting recently, and people actually had trouble finding skills in the game. So I've been adding more trainers and more characters that can teach you those skills, like this one here, Boris, and this one here, Scotty, and this one here, that I can't click on. Yeah, there you go, Glastevald. So these are 3 NPCs that can teach you things, and so yeah, these are very recent additions, and they're all gonna have little quests for you as well. And those quests are gonna hopefully not just gonna be like busy work, but they're also kind of going to sort of nudge you towards exploring different segments of Chapter 1. Now, the goal of Chapter 1 is getting through this up here. This guy here. This is actually one of the characters that you meet in the prologue. This is one of the characters that you actually entered the city with. And he's stuck in a bunch of goo. And you have to free him from there. And there's a bunch of different ways to free him from there. You can actually, so there's this alchemist here who can help you. And this alchemist here can help you free Strahd by brewing some acid. Some acid you can use to just kind of free him. Now, brewing acid is a little tricky. You need to find a bunch of ingredients, and some of the ingredients are tricky. Now, right now I'm playing in debug mode, so there's a bunch of whenever you see an item with a blinking debug thing on top of it, those are items that aren't supposed to be there. I just put them there to make it easier to test the different things. So these are all the ingredients to actually brew the acid, and this here is the acid, and this here is another of the ways you can get through, which is to use dynamite. He does not survive, unfortunately. So one of the ways through, you can find some dynamite and just blow him up. And that's actually a little bit cheaper to do. Even maybe a little bit easier to do. So yeah, figuring out some way through this is basically your goal in Chapter 1. Now, there's other ways to go through, though. There's actually several ways to bypass this completely if you explore, but you need to explore quite a bit to find them. Now, in order to find where these ingredients are, like for instance, you can one of the ingredients here is this. This is catalyst powder. Now, normally, if you're not using debug mode, the main way to find it is to buy it from this shop, but it's pretty expensive. If I remember, it is 90 gold. Now, 90 gold isn't that bad, but early on in the game, it's actually, you need to search a bit to find that amount of money. You might not have it yet. And the mushrooms there, those you need to explore to find. There's just a few places in Chapter 1 that gives you those. And also, you need some strong alcohol, because alcohol is sort of a base that alchemy uses. And that's a bit easier to find. So generally, most people are probably going to struggle to find the mushrooms the most. But yeah, so this is not really important. The specifics here of having to save him don't matter nearly as much as the fact that you're forced to stay here and start interacting with NPCs to find this stuff. And this is how, of course, you'll find a bunch of people you can recruit, and you'll find a bunch of people with quests, with tasks for you. Like the innkeeper, of course, wants you to get rid of rats in his basement, because of course he does. Yeah, there's a bunch of people here with problems, and some people there don't have problems, but can maybe help you solve yours. So this is, yeah, this is sort of the start of the game's I suppose, social element. Now, of course, you don't have to entirely focus on the social element. You don't even need to enter the pub. You can just explore. You can just treat this game as a dungeon crawler and just fight things. And eventually you find stuff anyway, so. Yeah, publess, that's right. There's a lot worse than publess. You can, there's actually a thing, I think I maybe talked that, I think I talked about this one time. That there's technically a way to beat this game without ever going outside. Without ever leaving, like without ever stepping under the sky, you know? It's weird, but you can do it. So there's actually some pretty fun restrictions you can try to play the game with. That's right, never touch grass, not even once. Now, that's pretty tricky. You need to know what you're doing. You're not going to do it by chance. You need to know about a bunch of secrets and stuff to be able to do it, but you can do it. You don't need to, like, break the game or anything. So yeah, that's basically the gist of what I've been working on, yeah. Just focusing on these characters here. Working also, I mean, the inside of the pub has been completely reworked. That's what I did last week, and the week before that. So this pub here used to be way simpler. There weren't like all these different pub people drinking and stuff. It was way simpler. Yes, there are save points on that route. There are 2 save points in the sewers, I think. But yes, also I've actually given they all have the pub patrons. They all have little hints. They'll have little things they tell you, and even tell you more than one thing if you speak to them several times. It's one of those games. So I'm pretty happy with this. I started like 2 weeks ago when I started working on the pub here. I really wanted this pub to have better atmosphere. It did not have great atmosphere before. I think now it's starting to get some atmosphere, but I think it could still be a bit better. I think there's still something missing. I mean, there's some stuff literally missing. Like there's like a counter that goes behind there with barrels and bottles. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. So yeah, what I'm working on right now is finishing these NPCs here, and then there's a bunch of other little quests I need to finish. But that's the gist of it for these few weeks. This here, so I talked about how there's some locations in the game that are more obviously unfinished, and this is one of the worst ones. I actually have the assets to make this look prettier. I just haven't taken the time to actually implement them yet. So you can tell, like, there's some chunks missing here. There's a bunch of, like, missing assets on the walls there and stuff. And over here, the assets for this room are actually being worked on right now. Scarodactyl is actually working on these. So that's probably going to be the next area that gets a little facelift. So that's going to be fun. Yeah, there's a Discord. There should be a link under the stream. Yeah, if you want to join that. But yeah, that's basically that's the little update. All right, well, if there's no questions, then that's going to be it for the first update stream. So as usual, on Mondays I don't stream, so next stream is going to be Tuesday, and yeah, I'll be working on some of this content then. So thank you all for watching, and take care.